I know you are ready for a new story, but tonight we are going to dive into a different tale than the usual stories. This one is drenched in power and passion, where ambition was carved from marble and destiny, where loyalty and betrayal danced in the shadows of Rome's greatest monuments, where one man's choices would forever alter the course of history. However, I promise this isn't another story. It's a journey through the gilded halls of power, where every whispered word could topple empires. A descent into a world where love and politics intertwined like serpents, where the fate of nations hung on the passion between two legendary figures, and where one man stood at the crossroads of history's most pivotal moment. I want to tell you about a time when Rome's fate balanced on the edge of a sword, when the Republic gasped its final breaths as ambitious men circled like wolves. An era when Egypt's wealth could buy armies and influence, when the Mediterranean was a chessboard for the powerful, and when a man's loyalty was tested between friendship, duty, and the intoxicating promise of love and power. From the chaos of civil war and political intrigue, a name emerged to stand beside legend's Marcus Antonius. But who exactly was Mark Antony, the general whose heart divided an empire, the man who stood as Caesar's right hand only to fall under Cleopatra's spell, the warrior who could have ruled Rome but chose love's embrace instead? I challenge you to imagine standing in Antony's sandals, torn between Caesar's legacy and Cleopatra's vision, between Rome's stern traditions and Egypt's exotic splendor. Picture yourself making choices that would echo through millennia, commanding legions while battling your own desires, watching as your decisions shaped the birth of an empire even as they sealed your fate. Are you ready to bear with me as we uncover how a brilliant military commander's passions changed the course of two civilizations? How a man who could conquer nations found himself conquered by love? How the choices of Marcus Antonius helped transform a republic into the greatest empire the world had ever known? Discover how Marcus Antonius rose from Caesar's shadow to become a legend in his own right. A man whose passions burned as fiercely as his ambitions, who commanded legions with the same intensity he loved. His story is not just of war and politics, but of a heart that defied an empire for love. I promise this journey through Antonius's life will reveal a man far different from the villain history remembers. His blood-soaked triumphs on the battlefield, his eloquence that swayed Rome after Caesar's murder, his fateful meeting with Egypt's queen, all pieces of a life consumed by loyalty and desire. Now, relax in a comfortable position. Our stories don't require you to watch the video. They are narrated to guide you on a relaxing journey to fall asleep as you listen. Feel your body relaxing, your shoulders, your hips. A warm feeling slowly relaxes your entire body from head to toe as if you are entering a warm bath of soothing water. Your body begins to relax as the water slowly rises from your feet to your legs, your torso, your shoulders. You feel every single muscle becoming more and more relaxed. Feel the comfort of this moment. Focus on the story and allow the narrative to gently lead you toward a comfortable sleep. And now, let the world of our heroes begin. My name is Marcus Antonius, and I was born to a family of warriors and statesmen. From my earliest days, I knew Rome would demand my blood and loyalty. What I could not know was how deeply my heart would be torn between duty to the Republic and devotion to those I loved. Caesar saw something in me that others missed. Not just strength, but passion. I was not like Cicero with his perfect words, nor Crassus with his endless gold. My power came from understanding men's hearts on the battlefield and in the forum. They called me reckless, a drunkard, a man of appetites, and I was all these things. But I was also Caesar's most loyal general, the one who stood beside him as we conquered Gaul and crossed the Rubicon. The day Caesar fell beneath their daggers changed everything. I still remember his blood on the Senate floor, the conspirators' faces frozen in their momentary triumph. They thought killing him would restore their precious republic. Instead, it unleashed a storm they couldn't control, and I became that storm. With words alone, I turned Rome against them, setting in motion events that would lead me to Egypt's shores and her queen. I was born in the year 83 BCE, when Rome still dreamed of being eternal. My family, the Antoni, carried a name that opened doors and raised expectations in equal measure. Though we were plebeian by technical rank, make no mistake, our blood was considered among the noblest in the Republic, our connections reaching into every corner of power. My father, Marcus Antonius Creticus, was given command of our fleets against the pirates. The gods granted him little favor in battle and less in life. He died when I was young, leaving behind more debts than glory. Yet in Rome, a father's failures need not determine a son's fate. I still had my grandfather's shadow to stand in. My grandfather, Marcus Antonius the orator. Now there was a titan of Rome. His words could sway the forum like Poseidon moves the seas. I grew up hearing tales of how his eloquence once saved men from execution and toppled political rivals. His blood flowed in my veins, a constant reminder of what an Antonius should be. Through my mother Julia, I claimed kinship with the Julians. Yes, the same family as Caesar himself. In my youth, I didn't fully grasp what this connection meant. Blood ties in Rome were currency more valuable than gold, and I was rich indeed, though I spent this inheritance recklessly in my early years. The weight of family expectation pressed on me like armor I hadn't grown into. An Antonius must excel in war, they said. An Antonius must master the art of speech, they insisted. An Antonius must navigate politics with cunning, they demanded. All while Rome itself began to fracture around us, as if the very stones were choosing sides. I came of age as blood began to stain the streets of Rome with increasing frequency. Marius, Sulla, the proscription's politics, had become a game played with swords rather than words. I watched men of ancient families executed, their heads displayed in the forum. This was the Rome that shaped me, magnificent, merciless, and teetering on the edge of transformation. Rome embraced me as one of her wildest sons. The streets knew my name before I turned 20. I drank until dawn with Curio and Clodius, gambling away fortunes we didn't possess. We were young aristocrats with fire in our veins, convinced the world existed for our pleasure. My debts mounted like sacrifices to forgotten gods, yet I regretted nothing. My companions were magnificent fools. Curio, brilliant in debate yet reckless in all else. Clodius, whose charm and viciousness made him both beloved and feared. Together we haunted the taverns of Subura, raced chariots down sacred ways, and scandalized the very senators who had once been our father's friends. The old men called us the destruction of Rome. The Rome of my youth was a city of magnificent contradictions. I would debate philosophy beneath marble temples in the morning, then witness knife fights in filthy alleys by afternoon. Senators proclaimed virtue while purchasing it by the pound. The wealthy built ever higher on the Palatine, while the poor crowded into wooden tenements that collapsed or burned with alarming frequency. I watched our republic fracture like an amphora dropped from the Tarpeian rock. Men like Pompey, Crassus, and my distant kinsman Julius Caesar gathered power while the Senate drowned in its own corruption. Street gangs controlled entire districts, turning elections into blood sports. Political arguments ended with daggers rather than persuasion. Rome was a fever dream of ambition. My reputation for debauchery served me well. While moralists condemned me, the common people saw a man who lived without pretense. I knew the gladiators by name, drank with legionaries and dock workers. I learned that power flowed not just from the Senate House, but from the hands of those who could command loyalty in the streets. This education proved far more valuable than any rhetoric. They called me dissolute, but I was merely observant. Each wine-soaked night revealed more truth than 100 Senate speeches. I saw through my youthful haze what many elder statesmen refused to acknowledge. Our republic was dying, not from external enemies, but from within. Rome needed not more laws, but stronger hands. And I, Mark Antony, would offer mine when the moment came. The East changed everything for me. Under Aulus Gabinius in Syria, I found my purpose. The weight of Roman armor across my shoulders felt like destiny itself. My first command came unexpectedly. 30 men looking to me for orders as Parthian arrows darkened the sky. I didn't hesitate. The words flowed naturally, and when I charged forward, they followed without question. Blood and sand. The campaign to restore Ptolemy to Egypt's throne taught me that war has its own language. I learned to read battlefield terrain like a scroll, to sense when men's courage would break. The veterans called it a gift. I called it survival. Alexandria's splendor awaited us, a prize worth the scars we earned crossing the desert. Alexandria. The jewel of the Mediterranean unfolded before us like a lover's promise. White marble gleaming in African sun, the great lighthouse commanding the harbor, libraries holding the world's wisdom. While Gabinius negotiated with courtiers, I walked the streets, breathing in spices from 3 continents. Something in this foreign land spoke to my Roman heart. My first true battle came when Ptolemy's enemies rallied outside the city. I led a cavalry wing, 300 men thundering across the delta plains. Time slowed as we charged. I remember the taste of dust, the thunder of hooves, the perfect clarity of purpose. My sword arm moved with a will of its own. When it ended, men twice my age saluted me. Power has many forms. I discovered mine that day. The common legionaries began seeking me out at camp. They'd bring wine, share stories of Rome, ask my opinion on the campaign. I treated them as men, not tools of war. In return, they gave me loyalty no amount of gold could buy. I learned then what my uncle Caesar already knew. Armies follow men, not rank. The path to Rome's heart ran through her legions. When we sailed from Egypt, I stood at the stern watching Alexandria shrink against the horizon. 3 years of Eastern campaigns had transformed the soft youth into something harder, sharper. I'd tasted glory and found it sweeter than any wine. Rome waited across the sea, Rome with her politics, her wealth, her power. I knew then I would return to Egypt someday. Neither I nor the gods yet knew why. Caesar's eyes studied me with that piercing gaze that seemed to strip away pretense. "You have a gift, Antonius," he said after watching me drill the cavalry. I had arrived in Gaul desperate and debt-ridden, expecting little more than a minor post. Instead, I found a man who saw something in me that perhaps I had not fully recognized in myself. "Your men follow you naturally," Caesar continued, walking with me along the perimeter of the camp. "They respect your courage, not just your name." I had spent my life trading on my family's ancient reputation, but Caesar demanded more. He saw beyond my debts and my scandals to the leader I could become if properly directed. That night at his command tent, over cups of watered wine, he spoke of his vision for Rome, not as the decrepit republic strangled by tradition and senatorial greed, but as something greater. His words ignited something within me, not just ambition, but purpose. For the first time, I saw a path forward that offered more than endless cycles of debt and reputation. Within months, Caesar entrusted me with my first independent command. The Nervii had been raiding our supply lines, and he needed someone bold enough to drive them back without destroying the possibility of future alliance. "You understand men, Antonius," he said, "their desires and their fears. Use that understanding." I succeeded beyond even his expectations. What impressed me most was not Caesar's gratitude, but his complete lack of surprise. He had calculated my capabilities precisely, as he did everything. His brilliance in war was matched only by his understanding of men's hearts. I began to see why he inspired such loyalty and such fear among his enemies. That evening marked the true beginning of my rise. As we stood before the maps of Gaul, plotting our next campaign, I no longer saw myself as merely Antonius, the debtor, the scandalous nephew of the consul. In Caesar's presence, I glimpsed the man I might become, a leader worthy of Rome's greatest traditions, yet unbound by its crippling constraints. I returned to Rome in the year 50 BCE as Caesar's political agent, my heart swelling with purpose. The city had changed little in appearance, but the political atmosphere crackled with tension like the air before a violent storm. Caesar had entrusted me with a crucial mission to protect his interests in the Senate, where his enemies gathered like vultures, eager to strip him of power while he remained in Gaul. My election as tribune of the plebs came at the perfect moment. The common people of Rome embraced me as their champion, not knowing how soon I would be called to defend their rights. I could see the fear in the eyes of Pompey's supporters as I took office. They knew what power a tribune wielded, especially the sacred right of veto that could halt their schemes against Caesar. The Senate chamber became my battlefield. When those corrupt old men moved to declare Caesar an enemy of the state, I stood firm and shouted my veto. The chamber erupted in chaos. I can still hear their outraged cries, see their reddened faces. "You defend a tyrant," they accused. I replied, "I defend the people's rights against a tyranny of wealth." When word reached me that the Senate had declared martial law, I knew my life was forfeit if I remained. Under cover of darkness, disguised as a common laborer, I fled the city I had sworn to serve. The journey to Caesar's camp was fraught with danger. Every Roman patrol could mean my capture and execution. Yet fear gave way to resolve. I was no longer merely Caesar's man. I had become the living embodiment of the people's violated rights. Caesar received me with grim determination when I reached his camp. I told him everything, how the Senate had trampled the sacred office of tribune, how they planned to destroy him without trial or justice. His eyes hardened as I spoke. "They have left us no choice," he said quietly. I knew then that we stood at the precipice of history. The die would soon be cast. I stood beside Caesar at the Rubicon in January of 49 BCE. The small river marked the boundary of his province. To cross it with an army meant civil war. As he paused at the water's edge, I saw not ambition in his eyes, but resolve. "They have corrupted Rome," he told his officers, "and we must reclaim her." When he urged his horse forward into the stream, I followed without hesitation. The water was cold, but my conviction burned hot. The day Caesar crossed the Rubicon, I knew Rome would never be the same. I rode at his side as we marched toward the capital, watching Pompey and his supporters flee without a fight. They called us traitors, but we saw ourselves as saviors of a republic corrupted by aristocratic greed. Caesar entrusted me with crucial commands as we pursued Pompey's forces across the Mediterranean. The die was cast. Roman would fight Roman. At Pharsalus, I commanded Caesar's left wing against forces twice our number. The morning air hung heavy with dread as I surveyed Pompey's cavalry massed opposite my position. Caesar had foreseen their strategy. They would attempt to flank us, then attack our rear. I positioned our cohorts in an unusual formation, concealing our fourth line of veterans. The trap was set. We needed only for Pompey to spring it. The clash came with terrible fury. Pompey's cavalry charged, initially driving us back as planned. Then I gave the signal. Our hidden fourth line surged forward, thrusting their pila upward into the horsemen's faces. Confusion spread through their ranks. I ordered the counter-attack, and we smashed into their disordered flank. The tide turned in moments. Never had I witnessed such disciplined slaughter between men who once called each other brothers. I watched Pompey flee the field as his center collapsed. The man who had once been Rome's greatest general abandoned his men to our mercy. We took their camp by nightfall, finding tables laid with feasts meant to celebrate their victory. I slept in a consul's tent that night, surrounded by the moans of wounded men from both sides. Victory tasted of ash and iron. 8,000 Romans lay dead by Roman hands. Word reached us weeks later of Pompey's fate in Egypt, beheaded by a boy king seeking Caesar's favor. I felt no joy at his ignoble end. Whatever his faults, he deserved a Roman death. Caesar wept when presented with his rival's head, and I understood then the complexity of the man I served. We had won the war, but the peace would prove more challenging. The old republic was dying. What would rise in its place remained uncertain. I never regretted fighting for Caesar's vision. The republic had grown diseased with corruption and inequality. Something had to change. Yet in quiet moments, the faces of fallen countrymen haunted my dreams. We had spilled Roman blood to save Rome itself. I told myself this contradiction was the price of progress, but the cost weighed heavily. Caesar understood this burden better than anyone. Perhaps that is why I followed him so faithfully. Caesar named me Master of the Horse before departing for Africa. "Rome needs a firm hand," he told me, his eyes betraying exhaustion from years of war. "I trust only you, Antonius." The appointment made me effectively his deputy, second only to the dictator himself. I felt pride swell in my chest, yet a shadow of doubt crept in. Commanding men in battle was one thing. Governing the heart of our empire was quite another. Rome was a cauldron of discontent. Citizens crushed by debt demanded relief, while wealthy creditors screamed for their due. Each morning brought new petitioners to my door, each evening new threats of unrest. I established tribunals to address the most pressing cases, working until my eyes burned from reading endless petitions. At night, I would collapse into bed, Caesar's words echoing, "Keep Rome standing until I return." The riots began in the Forum over grain prices. What started as shouting quickly turned to bloodshed. I ordered troops into the city, a decision I knew would provoke outrage. "Romans do not deploy legionaries against citizens," the senators protested. I laughed bitterly. "Would you prefer Rome burns while we debate proprieties?" The streets quieted, but hatred burned in the eyes of the populace. Perhaps they were right to fear such precedent. The debt crisis nearly broke me. Caesar had promised relief, but implementing his policies proved maddening. Every solution angered someone powerful. I found myself longing for the battlefield, where enemies were clear and objectives certain. In governance, I discovered only shades of compromise and betrayal. "Politics is warfare without bloodshed," Cicero once remarked to me with that insufferable smile. I was beginning to understand his meaning. I felt their resentment like a physical presence. In the Senate, men who had smiled at Caesar now whispered behind cupped hands when I entered. "Another of Caesar's puppets," they murmured, thinking I couldn't hear. Others were more direct. "Rome has traded one tyrant for another." I began keeping loyal centurions nearby, trusting my safety to men I'd fought beside rather than these perfumed politicians plotting in shadows. Messages from Caesar arrived sporadically as he pursued Pompey's supporters. His victories in Africa brought momentary unity. Romans always love a winner, but beneath the celebrations, I sensed growing fear of his power. And mine. One night, drunk on Falernian wine, I confessed to my aide, I was born to command armies, not manage ledgers and soothe egos. Little did I know how prophetic those words would prove in my later struggles with Octavian. The Lupercalia festival had always stirred something primal in me. That February day in 44 BCE, I stripped down, my body slick with sacrificial blood and oil. The ancient rite demanded it. We Luperci ran through Rome's streets, striking women with goatskin thongs to ensure fertility. But this year was different. This year, I carried something that would change everything, a laurel crown for Caesar. The crowds pressed close as I approached Caesar's golden seat in the Forum. My heart thundered louder than their cheers. I'd rehearsed this moment in my mind, though I still wonder whose idea it truly was. Mine. His. When I offered him the crown, the air itself seemed to still. Every eye watched as Caesar, with theatrical reluctance, pushed it away. Once, The crowd's reaction split like a wound. I offered it again. Again he refused, though his eyes held mine a moment longer. The applause grew stronger. Some faces in the crowd darkened with disapproval. I sensed Cassius watching from the shadows, his thin lips pressed tight. For the third time, I raised the crown. For the third time, Caesar declined. He ordered it taken to Jupiter's temple, declaring the god Rome's only king. Was I testing the waters for monarchy? Perhaps. Was I following Caesar's unspoken wish? I believed so. The sweat cooled on my skin as confusion replaced my earlier certainty. I'd thought the people ready, thought they would demand he take it. I'd misjudged the moment, or perhaps Caesar had. The crowd's division told a dangerous truth. Rome remained torn between republic and the rule of one man. Later, as I washed the day's oils from my body, Fulvia whispered warnings. "You've made enemies today," she said, her clever eyes narrowed. "The Senate seethes." I laughed it off. Caesar's power seemed absolute, our position secure. How could I know that each time I raised that crown, I drove another dagger into Caesar's back? That Brutus, Cassius, and the others watched and plotted? Just 1 month later, Caesar lay dead on the Senate floor. I've often wondered if my actions at Lupercalia hastened his end. Did I give the conspirators their final justification? The crown never touched his head, yet the mere offering became proof of his royal ambitions. In trying to elevate Caesar, I may have sealed his fate, a bitter lesson in Rome's complex game of power and perception. Trebonius caught me at the portico with a smile that now haunts my dreams. "Antonius, a word about Gaul?" he asked, drawing me away as Caesar entered the Senate chamber alone. The casual conversation stretched unnaturally while inside. Gods forgive me, they surrounded him like wolves. The sudden commotion from within froze my blood. I knew instantly they had planned it perfectly, separating the lion from his most loyal defender. The screams confirmed what my heart already knew. "Tyrannus is dead," someone shouted. Blood-soaked senators spilled into the street, daggers still wet with Caesar's life. I fled, certain I would be next. For hours I hid in a loyal plebeian's home, trembling with rage and terror. 23 wounds they gave him. 23. My mind tortured me with visions of how he must have fought, how he looked to the door expecting me to burst through. By nightfall, Rome became a city of whispers. I donned a commoner's cloak and ventured out to gather intelligence. Brutus and Cassius had fled to the capital, claiming to be liberators. Liberators. They murdered the greatest Roman, while I, Marcus Antonius, had been expertly removed from the equation. The bitter taste of failure filled my mouth. I had survived, yes, but at what cost to my honor? By dawn, I had made my decision. Survival first, then vengeance. I sent messengers to Caesar's widow Calpurnia, securing his will and papers before the conspirators could destroy them. Then I reached out to the Praetorian officers still loyal to our cause. "We play the long game," I told them. "Caesar would expect strategy, not just blind fury." Inside, however, my heart burned for immediate retribution. I negotiated a meeting with Brutus, controlling my rage as we spoke. The fool believed I might join their republican cause. I smiled, nodded, and secretly catalogued every conspirator's name in my memory. They permitted me to speak at Caesar's funeral, their gravest mistake. That night, I sat alone with Caesar's sealed documents, plotting how his words could reach beyond death. My tears fell upon his papers as I prepared the speech that would ignite Rome. The Ides of March took Caesar from us, but gave birth to something else within me. I was no longer just Antonius, the consul, the general, the friend. I became Caesar's avenger, his voice, his legacy made flesh. The conspirators believed they had killed a tyrant and restored the Republic. They failed to understand that Caesar's spirit lived on, in his veterans, in the plebeians who loved him, and in me. The daggers that pierced Caesar had forged me anew. The day of Caesar's funeral dawned with a city holding its breath. I had prepared meticulously through the night, rehearsing every inflection, every pause. The Forum would become my stage, and Rome itself my audience. As I approached the rostra, Caesar's bloodied toga hidden beneath my arm, I felt the weight of this moment. My heart pounded against my chest. This oration would either avenge my friend or fail him utterly. I began softly, praising Caesar's achievements while appearing to forgive his killers. The crowd leaned forward, straining to hear my measured words. Then, with calculated timing, I unveiled Caesar's toga, still stiff with his dried blood, pierced by 23 dagger wounds. A collective gasp swept through the Forum. Women wailed. Men cried out in horror. I let the silence stretch, watching their shock transform into rage. "Look how they butchered him," I whispered, my voice breaking. Then I produced Caesar's will, reading how he had left his gardens to the people and 75 drachmas to each citizen. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. I described Caesar's love for Rome while pointing to his murderers' homes. My words were measured, but my intent was clear. With each sentence, I stoked their fury while feigning to restrain it. When I finished speaking, I approached Caesar's bier and knelt, singing praises to the dead. Then I stood and, facing his waxen effigy, cried out, "Was it for this that you took Britain, that you conquered Gaul?" The crowd was now a single organism, breathing rage. Someone shouted, "Revenge!" Others took up the cry. I stepped back, watching as my words ignited Rome like dry tinder catching flame. What followed exceeded even my expectations. The mob seized Caesar's body, building an impromptu pyre in the Forum's heart. Shops were ransacked for fuel, magistrates fled, citizens threw their clothes, soldiers their awards onto the growing flames. I watched as fire consumed my friend's remains while Rome burned with vengeance. The conspirators' houses were surrounded, forcing them to flee the city they thought to rule. That night, as Rome smoldered, I sat alone with a cup of Falernian. I had avenged Caesar, turned the people against his killers, and positioned myself as his true heir. Yet, watching the distant fires from my window, I felt a tremor of unease. I had unleashed something primal in Rome's heart. A beast of vengeance that, now awakened, might not easily return to slumber. Still, I smiled. The first act in Caesar's revenge was complete. The Ides of March left Rome in chaos. Caesar's body lay in the Senate, blood pooling around his wounds, while the conspirators fled to the Capitol. I stood frozen, my mind racing, my mentor, my friend, my Caesar, gone. In that moment of horror, I knew what I must do. I rushed to secure his papers and fortune before others could claim them. Power abhors a vacuum, and I would not let Caesar's legacy slip away. I moved swiftly in the days that followed. With Caesar's documents in my possession, I maneuvered the Senate into passing the Acta Caesaris, confirming all of Caesar's appointments and decisions. The plebeians adored their fallen leader, and I used their devotion to cement my position. I delivered his funeral oration, displaying his bloodied toga. When I revealed his will, I expected to see myself named as his rightful heir. The shock of hearing another name nearly brought me to my knees. Gaius Octavius, Caesar's grandnephew, a boy of 18 I barely knew. Caesar had adopted him posthumously and bequeathed him 3/4 of his estate. How could Caesar choose this sickly youth over me, his loyal general who had fought beside him for years? I had shared his triumphs, protected his interests. Yet he had chosen blood over loyalty. I refused to surrender Caesar's funds to this upstart. The treasury belonged in experienced hands, my hands. When Octavian arrived in Rome, I dismissed him immediately. A pale, thin boy with no military experience, surrounded by ambitious advisers who clearly controlled him. He spoke with unexpected confidence, demanding his inheritance. I laughed in his face. What threat could this child pose to me, Caesar's trusted lieutenant? The boy surprised me with his composure. When I refused him, he simply nodded and withdrew without argument. I should have recognized the calculation in those eyes. Instead, I watched him leave, convinced I had put the pretender in his place. Caesar's spirit lived on in me, not in this sheltered youth who had never seen battle. The legions would follow the man they knew, not a name in a will. How wrong I was. While I celebrated my position as Caesar's apparent successor, Octavian was already gathering support. He sold his properties and borrowed heavily to pay Caesar's bequests to the people from his own funds, winning their loyalty while making me appear miserly. I had judged him by his youth and frailty, not seeing the cunning mind beneath. It was the first of many misjudgments that would cost me dearly in the years to come. After Caesar's death, I found myself in a precarious dance with Cicero. We circled each other cautiously, two wolves sizing up their opponent. Initially, we maintained a facade of cooperation. I needed his influence in the Senate, and he believed he could control me like a puppet. How naive he was, thinking his silver tongue could tame Caesar's right hand. Our uneasy alliance crumbled quickly. Cicero, that old fox, began his attacks with surgical precision. His Philippics, 14 speeches of such venom. He painted me as a drunkard, a degenerate, a threat to the Republic. Each word was a dagger, expertly thrown to wound my reputation. I had underestimated how deeply his hatred ran. I admired his skill even as I cursed his name. No one could twist words like Cicero. He made the truth dance to his rhythm. Antonius seeks to become king, he proclaimed, while portraying himself as Rome's savior. The senators nodded like trained dogs. They couldn't see that their precious republic was already dead. My response was fury unleashed. I rallied my troops and supporters, reminding them who truly held power in Rome. Not these old men clinging to outdated ideals, but those of us who commanded legions. Cicero represented everything that had failed Rome. Endless debate while the Republic crumbled. Caesar had seen this truth. Now, I embraced it fully. As I moved closer to Lepidus and Octavian, my conviction hardened. Cicero and his Senate were not merely opponents. They were obstacles to Rome's stability. Their endless machinations had brought civil war before. They would do so again. I began to see that harsh measures would be necessary. Rome needed strength, not speeches. The dance with Cicero would end as it must, with one of us destroyed. I harbored no illusions about his intentions toward me. His Philippics called for my head. When we formed the triumvirate, I knew whose name would top my proscription list. His eloquence had sealed his fate. Rome would have order, whatever the cost. Mutina became my battlefield of nightmares. I encircled Decimus Brutus, that snake who dared stab Caesar despite all he'd been given. Victory seemed assured until the Senate's forces arrived with Octavian among them. The boy I championed now stood against me. The clash was violent beyond measure. Blood soaked mud beneath our feet as legionaries fell on both sides. My centurions fought brilliantly, but the combined armies pressed harder each day. I ordered a tactical withdrawal after the second day of slaughter. My instincts screamed betrayal. Octavian, Caesar's heir, fighting alongside the very Senate that sanctioned his murder. The retreat became a rout as their cavalry harried our flanks. We lost supplies, wagons, and too many good men. I watched veterans who'd followed me for years fall to maintain our escape route. Each death burned into my memory like a brand. With our remaining forces, I made the desperate decision to cross the Alps. No Roman commander attempts this in spring when melting snow makes passes treacherous. Men froze during night marches, equipment abandoned as we climbed higher. I walked alongside my soldiers, refusing the horse offered me. If they suffered, so would I. Some nights I questioned everything. Had Caesar's cause died with him? Was I merely prolonging the inevitable? Hunger became our constant companion. We ate bark, roots, whatever mountain herbs the scouts found. I ordered my personal stores distributed, keeping only what any common soldier received. Men collapsed from exhaustion daily. I carried their shields myself at times, speaking of Lepidus waiting in Gaul, of our chance to rebuild. Some nights I caught whispers. Was Antonius leading them to death? Yet each dawn, they rose and followed still. My hatred for Octavian grew with each painful step. The boy played politics while I fought for Caesar's legacy. He'd used me to gain power, then discarded our alliance when convenient. I swore by all gods that I would survive this march and show him true loyalty to Caesar meant more than empty words. At night, I wrote plans by firelight. How to approach Lepidus, what terms to offer, how to rebuild my legions. When we finally descended toward Gaul, barely half my men remained. Yet those who survived were forged in suffering, men who would follow me to Hades itself. I gathered them before sending messengers to Lepidus. We are defeated, but not broken, I told them. Rome has not seen the last of Mark Antony. Their ragged cheer echoed against the mountains. In that moment, I knew this retreat was not my end, but merely the forging of something stronger. I met with Octavian and Lepidus on that small island near Bononia in November. 3 armies surrounded us, watching from the shores as we determined Rome's fate. The boy wore Caesar's name like a shield, his cold eyes calculating despite his youth. Lepidus, ever the mediator, stood between us. I despised the necessity of this alliance, yet civil war had bled Rome enough. 5 years of shared power, the second triumvirate they called it. Legal authority to reorganize the state without Senate interference. We divided the provinces between us, though I secured the wealthier East. The boy demanded too much, but I conceded certain points. Better to have him as an uneasy ally than an outright enemy, especially with his growing favor among Caesar's veterans. I watched Octavian during our negotiations, searching for Caesar in his features, found nothing but ambition wrapped in a frail body. His voice lacked Caesar's thunder, yet soldiers flocked to him. The name alone held power. I signed our pact with steady hands while my mind churned with suspicion. This boy would never be satisfied with a third of Rome. We compiled our lists of enemies that night, names of men to be eliminated. Cicero topped mine. His venomous speeches against me could no longer be tolerated. Octavian hesitated at first, as Cicero had championed him in the Senate. But power reveals men's true nature. He eventually traded Cicero's life for the deaths of his own enemies. Politics is survival, after all. I am the senior partner in this arrangement, the experienced general, the consul, Caesar's true heir in all but name. Lepidus is useful, but weak. Octavian has Caesar's name, but lacks his brilliance. I tolerate them both while planning for the inevitable confrontation. The East will provide the wealth and resources I need. The boy will overreach himself eventually. As we departed that island, I caught Octavian's gaze upon me, calculating, patient. A look beyond his 18 years. For a moment, doubt crept into my thoughts. Had I underestimated Caesar's heir? No matter. Our alliance is temporary, a necessary evil. Rome needs stability now, not more bloodshed. When the time comes, experience will triumph over youth. I am certain of it. The lists were necessary. I told myself this as I watched the names being inscribed, hundreds, then thousands. Senators, knights, wealthy men whose property we needed to fund our war. After Caesar's murder, Rome needed cleansing. The Senate chambers still echoed with his dying breaths. My hand did not tremble as I added names. Each stroke of the stylus was vengeance for my mentor, my friend. The Republic was dying anyway. We merely hastened its end. Cicero's name I saved for last, savoring it. The old orator who once called me a boy, who mocked my loyalty to Caesar. His silver tongue would wag no more. When they brought me his head, I laughed. They say I laughed. Perhaps I did. I had his hands severed too, the hands that wrote those venomous philippics against me. I displayed them in the forum where he had once denounced me. Justice has a certain symmetry. Rome ran red those weeks. I remember the screams in the night, the pounding on doors as our soldiers hunted men through the streets. Some fled disguised as slaves. Others hid in wells or sewers. Wives betrayed husbands for promises of safety. Sons denounced fathers. The city became a beast devouring itself. Octavian, that cold youth, checked names with the efficiency of a banker. Lepidus wept once, but signed regardless. We justified it publicly as necessity. To stabilize the state, we proclaimed, to avenge divine Caesar. The people believed because they needed to believe. They cheered as the heads were displayed, as properties were seized and redistributed. My soldiers grew rich on confiscated wealth. I rewarded loyalty generously. Some called me butcher behind closed doors, but to my face they smiled and praised my decisive action. Fur and gold by remarkable devotion. At night sometimes I saw their faces. Not Cicero's, never his, but the others. Men who had dined at my table. A poet who had once praised me, killed by mistake. A senator's pregnant wife who threw herself from a window. I drowned these visions in wine and women. Politics requires blood, Caesar once told me. I had not understood how much. 2,000 senators and knights, countless others. A sea of Roman blood to float our new order. The proscriptions changed me. I felt something calcify within my chest during those months. The Republic's ways were finished. We had made return impossible. Too much blood, too many ghosts. Octavian understood this from the beginning. Perhaps that's why the boy barely flinched as he condemned men who had bounced him on their knees as a child. We were forging a new Rome in fire, and fire, once started, consumes everything, even those who lit the flame. We marched into Macedonia with vengeance burning in our hearts. Caesar's assassins had fled to the east, but they could not escape justice forever. I led our forces with Octavian nominally at my side, though the boy seemed more shadow than substance. At Philippi, we found Brutus and Cassius waiting with their armies. The air was thick with anticipation. I felt Caesar's spirit watching, waiting for his blood debt to be paid. Cassius struck first, hurling his forces against our flank. Octavian had fallen ill, convenient, some whispered, leaving me to command both wings. I rallied our men with Caesar's name on our lips and pushed forward into their lines. The battle descended into chaos, blood and mud beneath our feet, but my veterans held firm where Cassius's men faltered. By nightfall, believing all was lost, Cassius fell on his own sword. 3 weeks later, Brutus made his stand. I studied his deployment with a soldier's eye. He was desperate, cornered. Octavian had recovered enough to appear, though he contributed little. I orchestrated our legions like musicians in an orchestra of steel and flesh. We broke Brutus's center, then enveloped his flanks. His men began deserting in droves. That night, like Cassius before him, Brutus ended his own life. When they brought me news of Brutus's death, I felt no triumph, only a cold, grim satisfaction. The man who had been Caesar's friend before becoming his murderer had paid the ultimate price. When they found his body, I ordered it wrapped in my own purple cloak. He had been honorable in his way, misguided though he was. Caesar deserved better friends, but I would not dishonor a fallen Roman soldier. With the smoke of their funeral pyres still rising to the heavens, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. My debt to Caesar was paid in full. The assassins were dead by their own hands or ours. I had proven myself the true inheritor of Caesar's military genius, while Octavian had shown his weakness. The men knew it too. They cheered my name across the camp that night, not his. Afterward, we divided the spoils of victory. I claimed the wealthy eastern provinces for myself, leaving Octavian to deal with the problems of Italy. Disgruntled veterans demanding land, food shortages in Rome. Let the boy play politician while I commanded the riches of the East. I would journey to Tarsus first, then perhaps Egypt. I had heard Cleopatra still ruled there. Caesar's former lover, they said, and a queen in her own right. The summons arrived with Rome's imperial seal won, as ruler of the eastern provinces, commanding Cleopatra to Tarsus to answer for her supposed Persian sympathies. How confidently I dispatched that order, reclining in my headquarters, imagining the Egyptian queen hurrying to explain herself. The arrogance of Rome flowed through my veins then. I expected submission. I expected fear. I expected anything but what actually transpired. She refused to come. Instead, a messenger arrived with an invitation. Cleopatra requested my presence aboard her vessel. I nearly had the man flogged for insolence. Then reports reached me of a golden barge sailing up the Cydnus River, its purple sails billowing in the breeze. The shores crowded with citizens abandoning their work to witness this spectacle. My curiosity overrode my pride. When I arrived at the riverbank, I beheld a vision that haunts me still. Cleopatra reclined beneath a canopy of gold cloth, dressed as Venus herself. Silver oars kept time with flutes and lyres while perfumed smoke drifted across the water. The Queen of Egypt had transformed a political summons into a divine visitation, and I, Mark Antony, conqueror of nations, found myself walking toward her barge like a common supplicant. That first banquet defied description. Dishes appeared and vanished with seamless precision, delicacies from every corner of her realm. When I complimented the golden plates, she shrugged and said they were merely camp furnishings. The next night, she gifted those same plates to every officer in my retinue. But it was her mind that truly captivated me. She spoke 9 languages and discussed Homer with the insight of Alexandria's finest scholars. Night after night I returned to her barge. We spoke of Ptolemy's library, of Caesar's reforms, of governing restive provinces. She challenged my assumptions about Rome's destiny with questions that left me searching for answers until dawn. She matched me cup for cup of wine, wit for wit in conversation. Never had I encountered a woman who saw the world as a chessboard of power the way I did. Alexandria beckoned through her words, a city of learning and pleasure, so unlike Rome's martial austerity. In her, I glimpsed an escape from the endless, blood-soaked politics of the Senate, the constant vigilance against daggers in the dark. Here was a ruler who understood power's burdens and joys as I did. As her barge finally departed Tarsus, I knew with certainty I would follow. The East had claimed me through its most bewitching emissary. Alexandria embraced us with winter warmth that Rome could never offer. Cleopatra's palace became my sanctuary, where nights of passion melted into days of intellectual discourse. I found myself captivated, not merely by her beauty, but by her mind, sharper than any sword I'd wielded. As snow blanketed Rome, I basked in Egyptian sun and the glow of a queen who spoke 9 languages and discussed astronomy as fluently as statecraft. The great library became our morning ritual. We'd walk among scrolls containing the world's knowledge, debating philosophy and tactics. Cleopatra challenged my Roman perspectives, opening my eyes to Eastern governance that valued culture alongside conquest. At night, we'd map our vision, a unified empire stretching from Rome to the Euphrates. Her fingers would trace coastlines on maps, while mine followed the curves of her shoulders. Alexandria's court dazzled my Roman sensibilities. fountains flowing with scented waters, meals that lasted until dawn, philosophers and poets at every gathering. I'd grown accustomed to military camps and political machinations, but here pleasure wasn't merely tolerated, it was elevated to art. Cleopatra taught me that indulgence needn't dull ambition. It could sharpen it. We plotted empire building between sips of exotic wines. I marveled at how she ruled, not with fear, but with calculated brilliance. She knew every grain shipment, every temple treasury, every foreign diplomat's weakness. When I spoke of Roman governance through strength, she countered with governance through loyalty. "Your Rome demands tribute," she whispered one night, her head against my chest. "My Egypt inspires devotion." I wondered which approach would outlast the other. Our children sealed our alliance beyond politics. When Cleopatra placed the twins in my arms, something shifted within me. These were not merely heirs to potential thrones, but extensions of our shared vision. Roman and Egyptian blood mingled in their veins, a living embodiment of the empire we envisioned. I found myself torn between my Roman duties and this new family that represented everything we could build together. Years later, I still question whether we truly understood each other. Was I seduced by ambition dressed as love? Was she calculating, or did she genuinely see in me a partner worthy of her brilliance? Perhaps both. That winter in Alexandria transformed me. We were equals in bed and in council, Roman and Egyptian, man and woman, soldier and scholar, creating something neither of our worlds had seen before, something that might have changed everything. The messenger arrived as dawn broke over Alexandria, his face grim with exhaustion. My brother Lucius and my wife Fulvia had raised arms against Octavian in Italy, and lost. The Perusian War, they called it. Catastrophe. My blood ran cold as I read the dispatches. While I'd lingered in Egypt's warm embrace, Rome had erupted into chaos. I ordered my ships prepared that very hour. Duty called me back to a homeland teetering on the edge of another civil war. The journey across the Mediterranean felt endless. Each wave carried me further from Cleopatra, who now carried my children in her womb. Twins, the oracle had predicted. I left her weeping, though she understood the necessity. Politics before passion, the eternal curse of men in power. My mind raced with strategies while my heart remained anchored to Alexandria. When Italy's coastline finally emerged from the mist, I steeled myself for confrontation with Octavian, Caesar's heir and my increasingly bitter rival. I found Italy in shambles. Fulvia had died in exile, sparing me a difficult reunion. My brother languished under house arrest. Octavian's forces controlled the peninsula, while my own legions stood ready in the east. We circled each other like wary wolves, neither willing to strike first, both knowing another war would devastate what remained of the Republic. Our armies camped within sight of each other at Brundisium, tension thick enough to cut with a gladius. Diplomacy prevailed where warfare threatened. For days we negotiated, surrounded by advisors and generals eager for different outcomes. The Treaty of Brundisium redivided the Roman world. The West for Octavian, the East for me, with Lepidus, our forgotten partner in Africa. To seal our fragile peace, I agreed to marry Octavia, my rival's sister, a political marriage, like so many before. Yet, when I met her, graceful, intelligent, kind, I glimpsed the possibility of genuine affection, despite the face that haunted my dreams. Our wedding proceeded with all the pomp Rome could muster. The people cheered this union, desperate for stability after years of bloodshed. Octavia stood beside me, radiant in her bridal clothes, worthy of respect and loyalty. I vowed to myself to honor this marriage, to be the husband Rome needed me to be. We established a household, shared meals and conversation, even laughter. I found myself drawn to her wisdom, her steady presence a balm to my turbulent spirit. Yet in quiet moments my thoughts drifted eastward. Cleopatra had given birth to our twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, sun and moon. Reports of their health reached me through trusted messengers. My heart dwelled in two worlds, torn between duty and desire. Rome demanded my presence, my loyalty, my Roman self. Alexandria offered something else, a vision of empire beyond Rome's traditions, and a woman who understood my ambitions. Each night I stood at the window, watching the eastern stars, wondering how long I could balance on this knife's edge before being forced to choose. I dreamed of conquering Parthia, Rome's most formidable eastern enemy. Alexander's shadow beckoned me eastward, challenging me to match his legendary exploits. With 16 legions at my command, nearly 100,000 men, I would secure Rome's frontier permanently and carve my name into history. The Senate might have been reluctant to declare war, but I needed no permission. My authority in the East was absolute. The logistics were staggering. Supply trains stretched for miles across the Syrian desert. I recruited kings as allies, including Armenia's Artavasdes, who promised safe passage and reinforcements. My initial victories were swift. We captured frontier fortresses and established bridgeheads across the Euphrates. I felt invincible as we pushed deeper into enemy territory, my men's confidence growing with each triumph. Then the Parthians revealed their true strategy. They burned their own lands, poisoned wells, and vanished before our main force. Their mounted archers appeared from nowhere, raining death upon my scouts before disappearing into the landscape. My heavy infantry, Rome's pride, stood helpless as our supply lines stretched dangerously thin. Artavasdes betrayed us, withdrawing as crucial cavalry support. The bitter decision to retreat came before reaching Ctesiphon, the Parthian capital. My dreams of emulating Alexander crumbled as I ordered the withdrawal. The march through Armenia became a nightmare, constant harassment from all sides, freezing mountain passes, dwindling supplies. I walked alongside my men, refusing the horse offered to me. If they suffered, I would suffer. If they died on foot, I would not ride. We lost nearly a third of my army, 30,000 men, to combat starvation and the merciless elements. Each night I walked among the campfires, listening to the moans of the wounded, counting the dwindling numbers. This failure haunted me more than any other. Not since Crassus had Rome suffered such humiliation in the East. Yet I saved what remained through sheer determination, refusing to abandon a single cohort to the enemy. Upon reaching safety, I learned that Octavian's propagandists were already portraying my campaign as a disgraceful failure, conveniently forgetting Rome's long history of Eastern setbacks. I needed Cleopatra's wealth more than ever to rebuild my shattered forces. She met me in Syria with gold and supplies, saving what remained of my dignity. In her eyes alone I found no judgment, only the practical understanding that even great men sometimes fail. Rome could not comprehend what I achieved that day in Alexandria's gymnasium. They called it treason. I called it vision. The donation ceremony was magnificent beyond Roman imagination, a fusion of power and divinity. I stood not merely as triumvir, but as Dionysus incarnate, while Cleopatra radiated the divine essence of Isis, her golden diadem catching the light as she took her place on a silver throne. I proclaimed her Queen of Kings that day, her voice steady as the Nile itself. The crowd's roar was deafening when I recognized Caesarion as Caesar's true son and heir. I saw Octavian's face in my mind then, how his borrowed name would mean nothing against the blood of Caesar himself. Perhaps that was my first mistake, though it felt like justice at the time. The territories I distributed were strategic, not treasonous. Armenia, Parthia, Media, Phoenicia, all to be governed by our children as client kingdoms loyal to Rome. Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene, Ptolemy Philadelphus, each received their birthright that day. I was creating stability in the East, a network of allies bound by blood and loyalty. Rome's senators saw only betrayal. They couldn't grasp the greater design. My critics called it Egyptian excess, but what I created was a new kind of Roman power, one that embraced the East rather than merely conquering it. The gymnasium glittered with gold that day, incense hanging heavy in the air as I placed diadems on my children's heads. Cleopatra understood this vision. Together, we were building something Caesar himself had only begun to imagine, a true empire of both worlds. I had begun to see through Hellenistic eyes by then. I admit it now. Rome seemed distant, its traditions rigid and unyielding compared to Alexandria's brilliant fusion of cultures. My heart had found its home beside the Nile, where my children grew strong under twin sons of Rome and Egypt. I believed, truly believed, that I served Rome's interests even as I embraced Egypt's ways. How fatally I misjudged the reaction in Rome. While Alexandria celebrated our new order, Octavian whispered poison in the Senate's ear. I underestimated how my ceremony would be twisted, how my distribution of kingdoms would be painted as dismembering the Republic rather than strengthening it. I gave them the weapon they needed, and they wielded it with deadly precision. My greatest triumph became my gravest error. Octavian's propaganda machine worked tirelessly against me. Every day brought new slanders from Rome. I was no longer Antonius the general, but a drunken puppet dancing to Cleopatra's tune. They claimed I planned to abandon Rome and establish Alexandria as the new capital of the world. The whispers became shouts. Roman citizens looked at my Eastern garments, my Egyptian honors, and believed the worst. I had become foreign to them. I responded with fury. My divorce of Octavia was not merely political. It was a statement. Rome had rejected me long before I rejected her. When I made my will public, including my wish to be buried in Alexandria beside Cleopatra, I knew I was crossing the Rubicon as surely as Caesar had. Yet what choice remained? Octavian had poisoned Rome against me. The Senate that once honored me now trembled at his command. The final insult came when Octavian illegally seized my will from the Vestal virgins. A sacred trust, violated without consequence. He read selected passages to the Senate, twisting my words to paint me as a traitor. The cowards declared war on Cleopatra, not me, a transparent fiction. They could not name me enemy of the state after all I had done for Rome, yet they made me one all the same. Former allies abandoned me like rats from a sinking ship. Men who had dined at my table, who owed their wealth and position to my patronage, now pledged themselves to Octavian. Each morning brought news of another defection, Plancus, Titius, even dear Domitius Ahenobarbus, all gone. Their betrayals stung more than Octavian's attacks. I had expected better of Romans who called themselves men of honor. What had I given Rome but victory? I expanded her borders, filled her treasury with eastern gold, and brought glory to her name. My reward, vilification and exile in all but name. Perhaps I had become more Egyptian than Roman, finding truth in their ancient wisdom rather than Roman hypocrisy. With Cleopatra, at least I stood beside someone who valued loyalty above expedience. Together we would face what came. We gathered our forces at Actium, the final throw of the dice. Our fleet was magnificent, though many captains were inexperienced. Our legions remained loyal, but I sensed uncertainty in their ranks. Roman fighting Roman again. The cycle Caesar tried to break, continuing through his heirs. As I donned my armor that fateful morning, I knew the Roman world would change forever by sunset. One of us would rule, one would fall. There could be no reconciliation now. The eastern provinces yielded their strength to me willingly. Over 500 ships gathered along the coast, their sails bearing the marks of Egypt, Syria, and a dozen client kingdoms. I watched with pride as Cleopatra's gold financed what would become the mightiest fleet Rome had ever witnessed. My legions, hardened by eastern campaigns, stood ready. The kings of the East sent their finest warriors, each eager to prove their loyalty to Antonius. We established our headquarters at Patras, a position I selected for its strategic value. From there, I deployed our forces along the Ambracian Gulf, creating a defensive line that would prove impenetrable to Octavian's smaller fleet. My veterans constructed fortifications with practiced efficiency. The treasury Cleopatra brought sustained us lavishly. Our men ate well, while Octavian's forces would soon face winter shortages. Victory seemed assured by numbers alone. My eastern troops brought skills unknown to Rome's traditional legions. Parthian archers, whose arrows could pierce shields at remarkable distances. Syrian slingers, who could strike a man's eye at 50 paces. Egyptian marines trained in boarding tactics no Roman sailor could match. I had spent years cultivating these forces, learning their strengths, adapting their methods to complement Roman discipline. Octavian's Western recruits were mere boys compared to my veterans. The first signs of trouble appeared gradually. Several minor kings who had pledged support failed to arrive with promised troops. Supply lines stretched thin across the Mediterranean, with reports of Octavian's swift Liburnian vessels intercepting our merchant ships. I dismissed these concerns in our war council, reminding my officers that Rome had faced great challenges. My confidence remained unshaken. Had I not conquered Armenia and Parthia, where others had failed? Disease spread through our coastal camps as summer heat intensified. The men were packed too tightly along the shore, and the physicians struggled to contain the fever. I ordered the burning of the dead each night, away from the main encampment to maintain morale. Some of my officers suggested we engage Octavian immediately, but I counseled patience. The sea would be our battlefield, where our numbers would crush his meager fleet. My veterans remained loyal despite hardships. Men who had marched with me through the scorching deserts of Syria and the frozen mountains of Armenia would not abandon their general now. I reminded them of the spoils that awaited after victory land grants in fertile provinces, gold from Cleopatra's treasury, positions of honor in our new order. Octavian might have Rome for the moment, but soon all the world would be ours. My tactical genius had never failed me before. Agrippa's naval maneuvers haunted my dreams. Month by month, that cunning fox tightened his grip around our supply routes. I watched from Actium's heights as his ships intercepted our grain vessels from Egypt. My stomach knotted as reports arrived. Another convoy lost, another port blockaded. My officers painted brave faces, but their eyes betrayed the truth. We were being slowly strangled, our options dwindling with each passing day. Our war council became a battlefield itself. "Fight on land," Canidius insisted, pounding the table. "Our legions remain superior." Cleopatra, eyes flashing like polished obsidian, countered with cold logic. The sea offers escape routes should fortune turn against us. I studied the faces around me, some nodding, others scowling. These debates grew more heated as our situation worsened. I wondered which strategy would save us, or if either could. The first whispers of betrayal came with the spring winds. A messenger intercepted, letters in cipher, then another. My trusted scribe decoded their contents with trembling hands, correspondence with Octavian, promises of clemency for desertion. Names I had trusted, men who had dined at my table, now plotted my downfall. I executed 2 tribunes publicly, but feared how deep the rot had spread. Each face now held questions. Friend or traitor? I ordered 50 ships burned at dawn, a decision that tore at my heart. The flames reflected in the Gulf waters as our finest triremes became ash and smoke. Concentrate our forces, I explained to my grim-faced captains. Better to command a smaller, loyal fleet than risk half-crewed vessels falling to enemy hands. None spoke the truth aloud. This was retreat disguised as strategy. I saw it in Cleopatra's eyes later that night, the first flicker of doubt. The strategic initiative slipped through my fingers like water. Agrippa seized the ports of Methone and Lucas, cutting our communication with the West. Our scouts reported enemy ships multiplying daily, while desertions thinned our ranks. I maintained a confident facade, dining with officers, inspecting troops with a smile plastered on my face. But alone in my quarters, I pored over maps until dawn, seeking escape from the trap closing around us in the Gulf of Ambracia. Cleopatra found me one night, staring at the enemy campfires dotting the distant hills. "They grow more numerous," I admitted. She placed her hand on mine, her touch both comfort and concern. "We must prepare for all outcomes, Antonius." The unspoken truth hung between us. We might need to flee rather than triumph. I nodded slowly, the weight of command crushing my shoulders. The great Antonius, once master of the East, now contemplating escape routes like a cornered fox. Dawn broke blood red over Actium as I donned my armor. My hands trembled, not from fear, but the weight of what lay ahead. 300 warships under my command faced Octavian's fleet across the narrow strait. The air tasted of salt and destiny. I watched my men prepare, their faces grim yet determined. Cleopatra's royal barge floated behind our lines, her golden sails catching the morning light. Little did I know how those sails would haunt my dreams forever after. The battle began with a thunderous crash of ships. I stood at the prow of my flagship, sword raised as we rammed an enemy trireme. The impact threw men into the churning sea. All around us, grappling hooks flew, wooden hulls splintered, and the screams of the dying rose above the chaos. I fought like Mars himself, cutting down 3 of Octavian's marines who boarded us. Blood soaked the deck beneath my sandals as I rallied my men forward. By midday, the battle hung in balance. Our left flank was faltering, but the center held firm. Sweat stung my eyes as I barked orders, directing our reserves to bolster vulnerable positions. The sea had turned red with Roman blood, both mine and Octavian's men. Then I saw it, Cleopatra's squadron suddenly unfurling their sails, catching the wind. Without warning, they drove straight through a gap in Octavian's line, fleeing southward toward Egypt. My heart stopped. Why was she leaving? Had we arranged this retreat and I'd forgotten? No, this was unplanned. I watched her ships growing smaller on the horizon while my men continued dying around me. In that moment, I made the decision that would define me for eternity. I ordered my flagship to disengage and follow her. I told myself I needed to protect her, but was it fear or love that drove me? Perhaps both. As we broke away, I heard the cries of my abandoned men. Some ships tried to follow us, creating a ragged retreat. Most remained, fighting hopelessly against overwhelming odds now that our formation had collapsed. I stood at the stern, watching my legacy burn and sink behind me. 19 years of military glory dissolved in a single cowardly act. My throat tightened as the distance grew between me and the men who had trusted me with their lives. We reached Alexandria 7 days later. In the nights that followed, I would wake gasping, hearing phantom battle cries. Could I have won had I stayed? Perhaps not, but I might have preserved my honor. In following Cleopatra, I had saved my life but lost my soul. Rome would never forgive me. Antonius, who abandoned his men. The battle that changed history had also changed me. I was no longer the man who had once stood proudly beside Caesar. I had become something else entirely. Our retreat from Actium haunts me still. With Octavian's fleet pursuing like wolves after wounded prey, I gathered what remained of my once mighty armada, a pitiful collection of vessels bearing the shattered remnants of my ambitions. The Mediterranean, once my ally, seemed hostile as we fled toward Egypt's shores. I confined myself to my quarters, drowning in wine and shame, unable to face the men who had followed me to this disaster. For days, I could not bear to look upon Cleopatra. My pride told me she had abandoned me at the critical moment, yet my heart knew I had failed us both. When finally we spoke, tears replaced recriminations. We clung to each other in the ship's dim cabin, 2 monarchs reduced to fugitives. "We still have Egypt," she whispered fiercely. Her strength shamed and inspired me in equal measure. Alexandria received us with uncertain faces. The city that had celebrated our love now witnessed our humiliation. I could not endure their pity or judgment, so I built myself a sanctuary of solitude at the harbor's edge. A simple structure I named Timonium, after Athens' famous misanthrope. There I dwelled like a hermit, watching the sea that had delivered my defeat, refusing all company save the wine jars that dulled my thoughts. The wine-soaked haze eventually lifted. News that Octavian marched toward Egypt roused me from my self-pity. I emerged from my Timonium to find Cleopatra already organizing defenses, negotiating with Eastern kings and securing the treasury. The queen had not surrendered to despair as I had. Shame propelled me back to her side, where I threw myself into fortifying the city against the coming storm. Some days brought wild hope. I spoke of raising new armies from the eastern provinces, of alliances with Parthia against Rome, of holding Alexandria until our enemies tired of siege. Other mornings dawned with crushing clarity. We were finished, and I had led us here. In those moments, I raged against the friends who had deserted me at Actium, only to later weep at my own strategic blunders. Cleopatra and I found ourselves transformed by catastrophe. Some nights we clung together, plotting impossible escapes to India or planning lavish suicide feasts. Other days we could barely look at each other, the weight of our fallen dreams too heavy between us. Yet even in this ruin, I treasured her fierce intelligence and unyielding dignity. If we were to fall, I thought, at least we would fall together, still defying Rome until the end. I sent desperate envoys to every kingdom that might still listen. Some rulers I had once aided, others merely feared Octavian's growing power. My messengers traveled to Parthia, Armenia, and distant realms beyond Egypt's borders. Each night, I waited for replies that never came. My former allies sensed the changing winds and turned their backs. Even those who owed me their thrones now pretended they had never known me. Alexandria's walls grew higher as I ordered every able man to labor on fortifications. I inspected our defenses daily, encouraging the troops with tales of battles where we had overcome greater odds. Yet I saw the doubt in their eyes. Desertion increased nightly. Those who remained were mostly veterans who had followed me for decades, loyal men who knew we were likely marching toward our final battle together. I led our cavalry outside the city walls at dawn, one final attempt to break Octavian's lines. For a moment, as we charged across the sand, I felt young again. My men fought brilliantly, cutting through the enemy's first ranks. Then their hidden reserves emerged from the dunes. Surrounded, we fought our way back to the city gates, leaving too many good men behind. The taste of defeat was bitter in my mouth. Rumors spread through the palace like poison. Servants whispered that Cleopatra's envoys had been seen entering Octavian's camp. Was she negotiating separately? I confronted her, and though she denied it fiercely, doubt had taken root in my mind. She spoke of protecting her children, of Egyptian sovereignty. I understood her fears, yet each word felt like betrayal. That night, I drank alone until the wine could no longer dull my thoughts. My officers reported more defections each morning. Men I had promoted, soldiers who had shared my tent for years, now fled to Octavian's promise of clemency. I could not blame them. Rome had chosen its new master. I stationed my most loyal Gauls at critical positions and rewarded them generously from my dwindling treasury. In their eyes alone I still saw the respect that had once been my due throughout the empire. I found myself staring at the sea each evening, watching Octavian's ships multiply like dark omens. The city that had welcomed me as a god now prepared for my defeat. Yet in those quiet moments, when despair threatened to consume me, I remembered who I was. Antonius, who had conquered kings and led Rome's legions. If this was to be my final chapter, I would write it with a sword in hand, not cowering behind walls. The messenger's words struck like a dagger. Cleopatra is dead by her own hand. My world collapsed in that instant. What purpose remained for me? The battle was lost, my army scattered, and now my queen, my reason for persevering, gone. I felt a strange calm wash over me as I turned to Eros, my faithful servant. Now is the time, I told him. I shall join her in the afterlife rather than be paraded through Rome in chains. I instructed Eros to fulfill his promise, to end my life when I commanded it. The poor man wept, drew his sword, then turned it upon himself instead. As he fell dead at my feet, I admired his courage. "You show me how it's done," I whispered. I grasped my own sword firmly, positioned the point against my abdomen, and with one decisive thrust, drove the blade inward. The pain was excruciating, but death did not come swiftly. Blood soaked my tunic as I collapsed onto my bed. Why do the gods deny me a clean death? I groaned. My men, hearing my cries, rushed in, their faces paled at the sight. When they revealed Cleopatra still lived, barricaded in her monument, I felt both joy and anguish. She lived. Yet I lay dying by my own hand. I begged them to carry me to her, one final request from their fallen general. The journey to her monument was agony. My men, unwilling to wait for the doors to open, hoisted me with ropes to the upper window where Cleopatra and her handmaidens pulled me inside. The pain of being lifted nearly ended me, but I clung to life, desperate for one last glimpse of her face. Blood trailed behind me like a crimson banner, marking the path of Antonius, once Rome's greatest general, now a dying man. Cleopatra wailed when she saw my condition, tearing at her clothes and scratching her breast in grief. I hushed her gently. "Do not mourn the manner of my death," I whispered. "Remember my former fortune and glory. I, a Roman, have been vanquished, not by Romans, but by my own hand." The warmth of her tears fell upon my face as she cradled me. In that moment, all my failures seemed distant and small. My vision darkened as I gazed upon her beautiful face one final time. "Seek not to destroy yourself," I urged her. "Remember who you are and what you've meant to this world." As life ebbed away, I saw flashes of my past. Young Antonius, riding through Rome's streets, standing beside Caesar, the triumphant days in Alexandria, and finally, the love that had defined my final years. My last thought was not of defeat, but of how gloriously we had dared. Death released me from my mortal shell, yet my spirit lingered, bound to her by chains stronger than those Octavian would forge. I watched Cleopatra kneel beside my bloodied corpse, her tears falling upon my face. Her grief was a tempest, yet even in that moment her mind worked like the finest Roman war machine. She knew what awaited her. Rome's appetite for humiliation was insatiable. My brave queen would not surrender to such a fate. I hovered near as she negotiated with Octavian's emissary, Proculeius. Her eyes were red but dry, her voice steady as she bargained for her children's futures. "My Cleopatra, Ever the diplomat, even as her world collapsed. Octavian's promises were hollow. I could see what she could not. His soldiers watched her like hawks, ensuring she would not follow me into death's embrace. My spirit raged impotently as I saw the trap closing around her. The moment Cleopatra understood her fate was exquisite agony to witness. Octavian planned to parade her through Rome's streets in golden chains. My queen, my goddess, reduced to spectacle. I saw the shift in her eyes, from negotiation to resolve. She who had ruled the wealthiest kingdom on earth would not become Rome's trophy. In that instant, she reminded me why I had forsaken everything for her. My spirit drew closer, whispering courage, though she could not hear me. Cleopatra's preparations were methodical, befitting a daughter of Ptolemy. She dispatched letters securing her children's passage to distant lands, beyond Octavian's reach. She arranged her treasury, ensuring loyal servants would be rewarded, all while Roman guards watched, oblivious to her true intentions. Her handmaidens brought her finest robes, royal diadem, and sacred oils. I recognized the ritual, not of coronation, but of burial. My heart would have wept if it still beat. The asp, that ancient symbol of Egyptian royalty, arrived hidden in a basket of figs. How Cleopatra smiled at this final victory over Rome's vigilance. She dismissed all but her most trusted handmaidens, Iris and Charmian. I watched her don her royal regalia one last time, more magnificent than when she had sailed to meet me at Tarsus. She reclined upon her golden couch, a queen to the last breath. The serpent struck, swift and merciful. I felt her spirit release, rising like incense toward the heavens. Cleopatra's essence joined mine in the ethereal realm, our souls entwining as they never fully could in life. Together, we watched Octavian's men break down the doors, too late to save their prize. They found a queen, not a captive. Cleopatra, still wearing her crown, appeared merely asleep. In death, she had claimed the final victory. Rome could conquer Egypt's lands, but never its queen's indomitable spirit.